took a deep breath as she held an apple core in her hand. She closed her eyes and focused on herself. Deep inside her, she felt power erupt. Attempting to burst out of her like a flood, she did everything she could to restrain it. Focus it. Turn it from a hurricane to a breeze. The power focused into her horn and then spread through her skin, cascading around her. And then she shut it down, closing off the flow of power, like a dam blocking a river. The power vanished, and Eri opened her eyes. And in her hands was a half-eaten apple. Eri released the breath she was holding. So close, yet so far. She'd take a few minutes to relax, then try again. She would get this right. Very, very soon. You ready? Fu asked, as he stood on top of the house. Ready, Kaiosei said in his head. Fu took off his shirt, and black wings grew out of his back. Then he jumped forward. Fu's wings caught onto the air and allowed him to slowly glide down towards the ground. All right. Everything's good so far, Fu thought. The wings had been a pain in the butt for Fu up until now. First of all, Fu would never be able to fly. It took him a while to figure that out, but just growing wings did not allow one to fly, contrary to what his siblings and TV would lead him to believe. Birds and other flying things were made to fly. Their weight, body structure, and everything about them had evolved in order to be made to fly. And Fu's body was not. Yes, hawks could fly with his wings, and both Sheena and Kiba could grow wings. But those wings were made of lies. Those were quirks, specificity made to allow the user to fly, or in Sheena's case, just her cheating reality. Hawks fly via telekinesis. He can mentally control his wings and feathers and uses that to allow himself to fly. Sheena literally alters reality in order to fly. And Kiba's wings physically exuded invisible energy, allowing her to fly. Fu had none of that. So the best he could do was glide. And even that was an absolute pain. Because as it turns out, aerodynamics was hard. Most of his attempts ended in him gliding in circles, gliding uncontrollably in one or random directions. Or the glider just not working, and causing Fu to splat against the ground. Alright, now I just need to learn how to glide better, and it'll almost be like I'm flying, Fu thought. And then a strong wind blew, causing Fu to fly backward, and splattered into the house. Fu sighed. Back to the drawing board. Sweat was another bodily fluid that Kiba was none too fond of. Currently, Kiba was doing push-ups in the training room. Normally this would be no problem, but with her new equipment that made it quite a bit harder. Her normal clothes were made to restrict her strength, but these ones were made to test it. Special weighted clothes that most normal people, and even pro heroes, couldn't so much as lift, let alone wear. These clothes made moving an exercise for Kiba, so basic push-ups were actually a challenge. Oof! Kiba groaned as she finished one last push-up, before sitting down and taking a small break. Hinata, who had been standing next to her the entire time, kneeled down and gave her a bottle of blood. "Thank you, Hinata," Kiba said, before taking a long sip. "Watching you exercise is thanks enough, Lady Kiba," Hinata said cheerfully. Kiba finished drinking and handed the bottle back to Hinata, who ran off to go refill it. "Alright, back to work." With that, Kiba went back to her push-ups. Sanson was in the forest, surrounded by Beowulfs. Rah! The Beowulfs charged at her, claws and teeth bared. The first one attempted to bite her, but Sanson turned into a puddle and ducked under it, causing the monster to accidentally charge into another Beowulf. Another Beowulf attempted to strike down at Sanson with its claw, but she backed up to avoid it. The Beowulfs tried to pounce on her, but she moved in between their legs to avoid them. Recent events had reminded Sanson that she was not immune to attacks. She could be attacked, and she could die from certain attacks. Hence she decided she needed to learn how to dodge. And so she'd spend the rest of the evening dodging these Beowulfs. Twip, 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 twip. Web smacked into targets that had been set up outside. Shiroku stood a good distance away and looked at the targets. Only one bullseye. Shiroku pouted. "How is Fuku so good at this?" Webs were the most important part of Shiroku's arsenal. She wasn't the fastest, nor was she the strongest. But her webs were a useful tool, unique to her. Of course, she would still keep up her strength and speed training, but webs would be her focus. Meaning she'd been spending a lot of time getting her aim right. Whack! Yami vomited grim goop all over the floor. As he was vomiting it up, the grim was already taking shape, and a few seconds after it was spat out, the Beowulf had already formed. Ugh! Yami groaned. He'd been making Grim for quite a while. And while there wasn't a direct drawback to him making Grim, he was still vomiting stuff, which meant if he spat out good for long enough, he couldn't breathe. But he had to keep going. His inarguably biggest weakness was how long it took him to make Grim on the spot. Sure, he could make smaller Grim pretty quickly, but those were only so useful. If he could master quick spawning, then his direct combat ability would go up dramatically. There was no improvement without suffering after all. Grrrr. Kai groaned as each one of his mouths was filled with massive dumbbells. that had been made for him. "You can do it, Kai," Kay shouted from on top of his head. "Thanks, big sis," Kai said, his mouth filled with dumbbells, and his head filled with motivation. Meanwhile, in his room, Moo was reading a book labeled Human Biology. Whoosh! A fireball slammed into a target, with two dummies next to it. The fireball exploded on contact and knocked down the target. Netsu, who was standing not too far away, looked at the result. The target was mostly destroyed, but the two dummies that had been next to it had some minor burns on them. Darn it. Netsu sighed. He was improving. Before, anything that got close to his attacks was likely to get serious injuries. But still, he had to do better. Couldn't have a hero going around burning the people he was trying to save. Slam! In the forest, Ken in his heat blast form rocketed into the earth, hard enough to bury the upper half of his body. Ow, Ken grunted. That was another failed attempt to fly using heat blast. Sure, Stinkfly could fly really easily, but what if he needed to fly and he wasn't heat blast? Or what if he needed to fly and set things on fire? And so he decided to learn how to fly with heat blast. Ugh! Ken groaned as he pulled himself out of the ground. Netsu was right. This is way harder than it looks. Nara stood in front of a dummy, in her diamond head form. Well, here goes nothing. She placed her hand on the dummy's face, and then crystals started coming out and covering the dummy's body. Slowly the crystal spread over its entire body until it was completely trapped in the crystal. Crack! Nara broke off her hand from the dummy, leaving it trapped. Yes, it worked. Yet another special move was attained. It would take a bit more optimizing, but Nara was confident this would be useful. Eventually. Niece stood still, holding her breath as she engaged in a very important task. Juggling. Now that might not have sounded very important, but for her, it was important training. By juggling a ball with her vectors, it helped improve her control over them. Because her biggest problem was controlling her vectors. Her other had already done most of the leg work when it came to strengthening their body and quirk. However, all the dexterity and control she had did not carry over to Niece. Meaning when she first tried to use her quirk, her vectors would often move around a bit more wildly than she would like, which could cause problems if she wanted to use them in combat. Currently, Niece was juggling a ball between her 4 vectors, slowly. Alright, let's try a bit faster, Niece thought to herself. She increased the speed of her juggling a bit, and everything was fine. A couple minutes later, she decided to go a bit faster. This continued for about 20 minutes, slowly increasing the speed every 3 or so minutes until, bam! One of her vectors missed the ball, and it slammed into her wall. Niece sighed and looked at the ball sadly. I didn't even go that fast. It was a mystery to her, how her other them operated so quickly and precisely, and would remain a mystery, because she couldn't communicate with her. She took a deep breath. It's okay, I can just keep trying, or I could watch some anime. No. Bad knees. Bad. Training first, then anime. Maybe treat myself to a nice ice cream. Yeah, that sounds good. Training, then anime and ice cream. Let's go. With that, Niece picked up the ball with her vector and started juggling again. Bang! Curses! Missed again. AKA swore. AKA was currently in the training room, holding a rifle and shooting at some targets. This rifle wasn't a normal rifle. It was designed to shoot special darts that would inject parts of herself into the target. Of course, Izuku had some reservations about giving children guns, but he quickly realized that quirks were far more dangerous than almost any gun out there, and so he relented. AKA, lunch is ready, Kyoka said, popping into the training room to tell her that. I will eat. When this is the target, is annihilated, AKA shouted as she reloaded her gun. Kyoka rolled her eyes. I'll just leave her food in the fridge. Alice dear, lunch is ready, Chol said as she entered her daughter's room, finding her sitting at her desk, hunched over her notebook. Just a second, Mom, Alice said as she continued writing in her notebook. Chol walked up to Alice and looked at what she was writing. She was just writing her name over and over and over again, very quickly and sloppily. Speed writing again? Chol asked. Yup. If I'm gonna be useful, I need to learn how to write fast, Alice said cheerfully, as she turned the page and started writing again. Chol smiled a bit and rubbed her daughter's hair. What an earnest girl I've raised. Yaba, G, and Inu were all running around the track in the backyard. All of them moving in perfect sync. None of you need a break, huh? Yaba asked her sisters. Do you? G asked in return. Not at all. Jabba smirked. Let's go faster. And change formation. Yizur. G and Inu shouted. Lu took a deep breath and cocked his fist back. Currently, Lu was in the lab, in one of the test chambers, staring down a block of steel. Lu was covered in his red aura from Chaos Boost. But that wasn't what he was gonna use to strike. Instead, he was gonna use a new special move. Lu could not hold on to too much chaos energy at once. But what if he didn't have to hold on to it? What if Lu could summon the energy and release it instantaneously, not giving it any time to harm his body? If he could master this, then he could greatly increase the power of his attacks. Emphasis on the word, if. Ha! Lu swung his fist forward. Ding! And it collided with the steel, doing no damage, and hurting Li's hand. Lu didn't even have time to register the pain, before the second part of his failed attack made everything so much worse. Kaboom! Li's fist exploded, destroying the steel black, but sending Lu flying back, hitting the wall of the test chamber and knocking him unconscious, as well as leaving Lu with a burned and broken hand. This was gonna be a long and very painful road. Giza was walking into the cafeteria from the kitchen with a bowl of ramen in his hand. He sat down and decided to finally address something. Himiko, I can sense you. Oh whoa. Himiko groaned as she climbed out from under a table behind him, with a disappointed look on her face. How? I did what you said and made sure my footsteps were quiet? True, your footsteps were notably harder to hear. If I were slightly less experienced, even with my hearing, I might have chalked the odd sound I heard to background noise, Giza admitted. But you've far from mastered the technique. But that wasn't your real problem. Your real was your excitement. I could feel it from the moment you started tailing me. Huh? You can feel other people's emotions? No fair. Himiko pouted as she sat next to Giza. Everyone can, with enough training. And even without training, some people can still detect things like malicious internet. Giza explained. You must learn to suppress your aura and emotions. Master your movement techniques. And learn how to fully analyze and utilize your environment. Then you will be able to move on to even more advanced techniques. I will sensei, Himiko said with a crazed smile. I'll be the best ninja in the world. With your potential, I don't doubt it. Giza thought to himself as he started eating his ramen. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Shiroku encouraged. Shiroku was currently outside, holding a stopwatch, in order to help out Kano, who was flying in front of her, with weights tied to her feet. Grrrr. Kano grits her teeth, sweat pouring down all over her body, as she struggled to keep flapping her wings. Just a few more seconds, so close, done. Shiroku shouted as the clock reached 10 minutes. Slam! Immediately Kano stopped, and both she and the weight fell onto the floor. Ugh! Kano groaned, and Shiroku immediately went over to help her up. holding her up with her shoulder. That was great, Kano. Let's go get you some O negative. You've earned it, Shiroku said. Oh Shiroku, you've taken the words right out of my mouth. Kano smiled, as the two left the training room. Odo was silently beating up on a punching bag when Kiba approached him. I've noticed you don't really like to use your quirk much during training, Kiba told him. Well, today's your lucky day. Today, I'll allow you to use your quirk against me. The great lady Kiba. Odo stopped what he was doing and raised an eyebrow at her. Kiba's mood immediately soured and she pouted. What? Are you saying I can't take it? I'll have you know I have the greatest endurance of anyone here. Plus my great regeneration will allow me to dash. Go away. It was a whisper, just a slight whisper. Something that would normally not even be heard over Kiba's talking. Boom! But it was enough to create a strong sonic wave in front of him that sent Kiba flying into the wall. Ha! Kiba shrugged. Her dress was torn a bit, but ultimately she was fine. So it seems like the caretaker wasn't exaggerating. Still, you're going to need more than that to dash. Enough. Kaboom! This time Odo spoke in a slightly louder whisper, just below what one would call a normal speaking voice, but even still the sonic wave it emitted smacked into Kiba even harder, pinning her against the wall and destroying some of her clothes. I actually felt that one, Kiba said, shaking off the hit. But are we done with the weak sucker punches now? I want to see your real power. Odo's eyes widened as he saw Kiba, seemingly unfazed by that attack. Back when he was training the quirk breeders, no one, not even their best trainers, got off unharmed from his whispers. That much would normally hospitalize people. How are you still standing? This time Odo spoke in a normal speaking voice, and the sonic wave burst from his mouth, completely encompassing the side of the room he was facing. Kiba barely had time to bring up her arms and block, before the shockwave slammed into, sending her flying back into the wall again. This one was different from the other ones. This one hurt. The force made Kiba's bones shiver, and tore cuts into her flesh, while simultaneously blowing out her eardrums, causing blood to leak out of her ears. The entire room shook from the force of the attack like an earthquake had gone off. Fortunately, it was over very quickly, and Kiba was freed from the pressure of the attack. Her body immediately started to heal whatever injuries she had. Okay, that was a lot. Kiba groaned as she tried very hard not to acknowledge the pain or the fact that she was now naked due to the last attack completely destroying her clothes. But that wasn't your best, was it? Come on, give it to me. Scream. Odo was in disbelief. This was impossible. No one could withstand him talking so easily. It just couldn't happen. And yet, Kiba stood in front of him, unharmed. Sure, she'd taken some damage, but it had been very minor considering the weight of the attack she just took, and her quirk healed it in seconds. And now she wants more? He seriously wouldn't have believed it, had it not just happened. Could she take his max power? He'd only ever used it once by accident, and never again because it destroyed the facility he was in, as well as the land around it. He'd thought that anyone taking that would be utterly impossible, but Kiba had already done the impossible, right in front of him. Odo coughed a bit, clearing his throat. This was going to hurt his throat quite a bit, but he had to know if she could take it. Go! Crockham! Izuku was doing some more paperwork at his desk, when suddenly, the entire house started to shake intensely, before suddenly stopping. Either that was a very abrupt earthquake, the lab just did something they shouldn't have, or the kids are taking a sparring match too far, Izuku said to himself with a sigh. I have a feeling I know the answer. Kiba fell onto one knee, breathing heavily, with blood running down her entire body. Her healing quirk was already on healing the patches of skin that had been torn off, the organs that got ruptured, and the bones that were snapped, as well as healing her ears. Okay, that was gonna need a second. Kiba groaned. Maybe lay down for a second. She survived. She's not okay, but she's not gonna die. Odo thought he was so shocked he didn't even pay any mind to how much his throat hurt. On that day, Odo felt like the world around him crumbled. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. Shum. A black energy arrow slammed into a target, hitting close to the bullseye, but not quite hitting it. This is harder than it looks, Seikyo commented, holding a bow she made out of negative energy. Why yeah, Fuku said. She'd been dragged along to help Seikyo practice. Thankfully Seikyo had enough tact to let her get her hoodie before they started. But you're really good at it. Just a bit more practice and you'll be able to hit bullseyes easily. I hope you're right, Seikyo said. By the way, what made you want to pick up archery? If you don't mind telling me, Fuku asked nervously. I don't mind. I was watching some anime, and realized I lacked something. Seikyo explained. Weapons. Weapons can help me out a lot. They can help me fight at close range, and with a bow, I found that focusing dark energy into a small arrow not only can help pierce through opponents easier, but it also increases its power. And it can do this. Boom! Suddenly the arrow exploded, destroying the target and causing Fuku to jump back. Ah! Fuku shouted in fear, her face turning white under her hood. Warn me before you do that. Just because you're used to explosions doesn't mean everyone else is. Sorry. Seikyo apologized. And now please excuse me. Fuku blushed under her hood. I need to go, pass gas.